Hello, in this demonstration I will show how to run a Spark notebook in Google's Colab. The emphasis will be on Spark, or in particular PySpark, and not on Colab. So it's just how to set up a Colab notebook so that you can run Spark and some of the nuances you'll need. I'll show you how to create a notebook, use some libraries, work with Google Drive, which is a classic thing people do in Colab, and install a Spark UI. Also show you a trick on how to double the amount of memory, and hopefully it'll work for you after this video is released. People will probably do it, but hope it continues to work. All right, so let's go to it. I'm going to show you how to go to Colab, which is simply colabresearchgoogle.com. You can just Google Colab, and you'll be able to access a cloud notebook. The cloud notebook is running a virtual computer in the cloud that's a server set up to run a Python notebook. And you may want to know what's inside that virtual computer. So you can go to this release notes and see the libraries that are installed there. And that'll be important. You don't have to reinstall libraries if they're already there. Of course, you can install them. I'll show you how to do that. In addition, it comes with some Python modules already loaded, and you can augment them, of course, with pip to install some modules. But here's a place to look to see what's already loaded. And because of this, some of the instructions you'll see on the web having to do with installing Java and so forth are no longer necessary because they're already installed. So we don't need to install Java. So next up, if we look at the notebook in the upper right, we can see how much memory and disk space it has. It starts with about 12 gigs of memory and a 100 gig disk. And this is the trick that I referred to. It's on Stack Overflow. And if you read through it, some things initially worked, but then later on they don't work. The one thing that does work still is to download this notebook and work with this notebook, and it'll have twice the memory, which can be useful, especially if you're doing some deep learning things. And let's say you are doing some deep learning and it runs all night or a couple days. One of the problems is there's going to be a pop-up that says, "Are you still there?" and it'll disconnect and you'll lose all your work. So you want to prevent Colab from disconnecting. Again, Stack Overflow is a place to learn about how to fix this. I show one of the solutions here, and it'll be a little bit of code you'll put in your browser. You'll open up your browser's web development tool with Control-Shift-I that works on Chrome and Firefox. And once there, you'll paste into the console this, click connect. And that should work. But if it doesn't, then read more about it on Stack Overflow. There's a way that may still work if you have this failing for you. It's just you have to get the current click connect, the requesting ID, and then work with that. But generally this seems to work. So if you want to run your jobs for a few days, then you'll want to know that. So particular, I'll just show you how to open a notebook, and you can do a new notebook. It's pretty straightforward. I'm sure there's lots of good videos on how to use Colab in detail. You can run all, and there's various keyboard shortcuts and menu items to run the notebook. It's pretty common in these notebooks to run pip, which I'll show you, but less common is to use this method to include some jars that are necessary to run Spark jobs. So if you're running a Spark job and it requires some specialized library like spark-nlp or Google Cloud, these cannot be installed only with pip or the Python module. You must install the jars, and the jars must be associated with your Spark session. So I'll show you how to do that. And then, of course, you want to be able to access your Google Drives. You can save and load data. And then the Spark user interface is another thing that's important. It's it's particular to Spark. I'll show you how to get that running within Google Colab. So just a little bit about this setting up your Spark session. This is a very typical way of setting up a common Spark session, and that is you need to install PySpark. So I use the command here to run the shell. The exclamation point at the left is a common magic command in notebooks. So pip install, and I have a Q for quiet, and then PySpark. And it used to be required, but maybe not so much anymore, but I still do it because you never know if they're going to change the underlying virtual machine. So I go ahead and install FindSpark, although it's probably not necessary, certainly not with example today. And then once you have that installed, that's a way for Python to connect to Spark. Then you'll make a Spark session. And the common way to do it is just this little bit of code from line 7 here. We'll make a Spark session, and we'll give it a name and so forth. And then thereafter, you can use the variable Spark, which is the way you interact with the Spark system. But so not so common is that people use libraries that require jar files. And this is John Snow's spark-nlp or Google's Cloud BigQuery. And there's lots of other libraries that are essentially jar files that must be loaded and included in the namespace so that your Spark session can work with them. There's a variety of ways to do it, but I would say the common and best way is to use the configuration of the Spark jars packages. This way it'll work on a cluster, and these will be distributed across the cluster. So Spark itself will download these jar files. And you can configure it, but by default it's going to download from the maven repository. So these are a maven coordinate system description of these jar files, which is the group, and then the artifact itself, and then some version information. And hopefully whatever package you're working with, you can get the information on how to get a maven coordinate. But if not, then you can just go to Maven repository, mvnrepository.com, or just Google. You want to look for, in this case, John Snow Labs, for example. And I'll show you the web page in a moment, but this is the highlights of this web page, and then you'll find the library you want to work with, and then you scroll down, which I'll show you in a moment, not shown in this slide, to get the maven coordinates. So once you have those maven coordinates, they're put in this as a string in this list of jar files, and then they are fed into the Spark config for Spark jar packages. Okay, and the cool thing is in Spark, when it starts up the session, it contacts the Maven repository, downloads the jar files, associates them with the runtime, and that works for, however big your cluster is. You got 10 computers or 10 nodes. It'll do it for all of them. Right, next up, Google accessing the drive. Anyone that shows you Colab will show you how to do this. You have a import of the Colab, and then you mount your drive. And then once you have that, you can do bash or shell commands, terminal commands. Here, exclamation point ls for listing, and then you can see that the drive is mounted. That way you can access files, open up data, or open up a notebook. Next up, this is specific to Spark, and so it's very important that you have some way to access the Spark user interface. You can't access it on this virtual machine, so you need to route the internet traffic, the IP, from the virtual machine to some intermediary. And the common way people use is this ngrok. So you need to sign up first at ngrok, and once you've signed up, then you'll get an authorization code, which you'll use here below. So the idea is, in one of your notebook cells, you'll download the data and do the proper configuration. You're downloading the software for ngrok, unzipping it essentially, and running it and configuring it. So that's all that does. And the last little bit gives you a nice little link that you just click on, so you can go to the URL, which will then show you your Spark UI. In order to do this, you need to sign up at ngrok. It's free, and once you sign up, you get an authorization code. I'm not showing you my code, but you'll need to uncomment this line in the notebook that's associated with this video, and run ngrok config, add authentic token, and then there will be your token. You don't need to put it in string quotes. You could just put in the token. It's typical for me. I don't know why it always fails the first time I run it. So I just I run this, I run my notebook, and then I restart and rerun the notebook, and the second time and thereafter this configuration works. I don't know why, for some reason. Let me know if you know why, but the first time the code runs, it seems to fail. It will not connect to the remote site and then connect to the URL for this Spark UI. Well, anyway, once it does work, once I've restarted the notebook for the first time, then you get your Spark UI and you can look through, and of course that's important for debugging a Spark program. And then this video and this associated notebook, I just have a simple PySpark linear regression. It's the usual where you have a pipeline and just fit some data. So really nothing exciting about that, but I'll just walk through it. And then some other notes about the Colab. You can also have some extensions. Here we're loading extension for tables. And by tables, they don't mean, unfortunately, PySpark data frame. They mean a pandas table. Nevertheless, this can be something nice to use with Colab, even if you're doing some Spark analysis. So there's a number of them. Colab extensions. There's the pandas table. There's a Colab X terminal, which is the free version of having a terminal or bash shell into your remote computer. And then TensorBoard, if you're using TensorFlow, you might want to use this. So just be aware of these. You can see more tips. I mean, look all over the website, but here's one I found useful. And you can also include VS Code, the editor, within your Colab. So it's quite a nice extension. Just another tip about all of this. Let's say you're at GitHub, and this is a really cool notebook that you want to work with. All you have to do is replace, when you're looking at the notebook, replace GitHub with GitHub to Colab, and it'll automatically open up that notebook that's on GitHub into Colab. So this is just a technique. It's, I guess you can save it locally and open it within Google Colab, but it's just a quick way of opening notebooks from GitHub, which we all do, to open them within Google Colab. All right, let's see if I can get some of this to work. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my demo now and run what I just introduced to you. Here I am within Google Colab. I went in and ran the notebook once, and just want to want you to see, if I move my mouse over here to the right, I can see how much RAM and disk space there is. And this will be important later on when we'll show you how to double the amount of RAM that you have. It may be hard to see, but it says I've got 1.6 gigs of usage out of about 12.68 gigs of possible RAM. And there's some disk space there too. It's about 100 gigs of disk space. All right, so there's my notebook. Let's look through it. So one of the first things to note here at the beginning, I'm going to go ahead and do a pip install to install PySpark. So that's important. That allows the Python to connect to your Spark in the background. This step I go ahead and run, but you can remove it in the newer versions of the virtual computer run by Colab because it's not necessary, but just because I run it, it's no big deal. So just a way to make sure that the PySpark system can find out where Spark is installed on the Colab virtual computer. Next up, there's two ways to run these sessions in particular. The one here is the one I'm going to use right now because I'm not going to do a custom Spark session. So I just do what you'll see any tutorial have about Spark Session Builder. And then you fill out some of these configurations for it. The application name, for example, the port for the Spark UI is the default port, but this should show you. And then you're going to run on a cluster here and use all of the virtual computers. So that's all that is, and print out the Spark version you can see here. And you can change that, of course, if you want. That's a typical way to get this Spark variable, and then thereafter you use the Spark variable to communicate with your Spark session. Spark is the access to the Spark session. So a little bit more about that. If you look over here to the left, on the left side of the Colab, you got some menu items, and you can see the table of contents. So this has been set up so there's a number of items here in the markdown headings. You can search and replace. You can look at some variables. And I've already run the notebook, and so Spark should be a variable. You can see here it's in the interpreter, and you can see some other variables there too. Next up, there's some snippets. So you can, if you want, use some of these snippets. Hey, provide a few snippets already. And there's a command here next. It's sort of like VS Code. And lastly, there's a way to open up a terminal into the remote computer. But if you can see here, it's only for the Colab Pro. And so if you purchase the Pro, of course, you get this feature, and also you get more memory. So if you want to buy the Pro, then you get a little bit more with it, of course. So you're going to get more memory here, get clusters, more computers, all the things you want if you're really doing some big data. But here we're just we're just starting out, so we're not going to do that. We've got a workaround for this terminal. So back to where we were. Let's go a little bit further. As I mentioned before, if you want to load up some jars that have some libraries, such as for BigQuery or John Snow Labs NLP, then you've got to load these jars into your session, and that's what this configuration does. I've just set up to be, a variable. If you set custom Spark session above, then it'll run this code. And what is this code? It's going to take this list of jars, list of libraries found on Maven. They're called Maven coordinates, where the first part is the group and the second part is the artifact with its version. And then it's simply a list of these things. It's just a Python list, right? It's going into this jar package, and I just use the Python notation here to make it a comma separated list. And you can specify a few other things here, some of which are necessary for spark-nlp, and you just can set properties of your Spark. And once that's done, then you can go ahead and run it, and everything should work. So just a note about this, these libraries, it's pretty important. I think I mentioned before that these, if you're going to use Google Cloud, for example, you want to load up these libraries, and you go to the Maven Central to figure out where your library is. And here I am at Maven Central. And when I select one of these libraries for John Snow, for example, then you see in the center screen is the Maven coordinate. You can use Gradle and all the rest of it. But here we are, the Maven coordinates are used by Spark, and there's the group ID and some other information. So you'll need this in order to access, to reference it. So there's the first one and there's the second one. If you go back here, you'll see that that's what we've got going in here. Okay, so that's one way to load up your libraries that you'll need for your Spark session. All right, next up, not sure why this is supposed to be a heading here about loading the Xterm console. In any case, we can go ahead and use the pip command to install this Colab Xterm. It's a extension, and once it's loaded, then you've got a command here to run an xterminal. And it looks like it's timed out because I've been talking, so let's just run it again. And the idea here is that I've got a way to access my remote computer right now. So you can run usual Linux commands and just run top here to see how much CPU it's using. It's not really doing anything. Right, so that's quite helpful. That takes place of the pay-for version of the same, which you can access down here with the terminal. It's a full X terminal, so you can split the screen and all the rest. Next up, we want to access the Spark UI. You'll need to go to this ngrok. It's a common way to do it. And here's ngrok. If you go to the website, you can you don't have to download any software, just ignore all this stuff. All you have to do is get your authentication token. Once you've got your authentication token, then you're going to plug it in to this part of this statement. So if I was going to do it, I would uncomment out, and I'd put in my token right here, blah, 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 whatever your token is. Okay, and then I'll run the statement. So this is going to download the software. It's going to make sure your token's set up and connect. And once you've connected, then you should be able to click on this link. And the first time, I've always noticed it always gives me an error, but second time I can click through, and meaning the second time I run my Colab notebook, I'll restart it, and then I can see my Spark jobs and stages and all the rest of it from your Spark UI. So this is super useful, and recommend you set it up. Okay, next up, Google Drive. Just the usual, you're going to import your Google Drive and then mount your drive. Once you've done that, then you can do a listing of it, for example, and see that the drive is mounted. I don't think I mentioned it, but here one of the items is file system, and then you can see that the Google Drive, it shows off of this, and this is the local file system, and then the mounted drive, which connects to your Google Drive. So there's that. And then next up, let's see if we can run a regression now that we've set up our Spark notebook to run Spark. And it's this is the demo I have in another video, and I'm sure you can find plenty on the web. I'm just getting some data to do a regression. So I've downloaded the data. I've ran it a couple times. So I've downloaded it a couple times here. I read my data into a data frame using Spark. I show, which is a classic way of looking at the data frame in Spark. It's not very nice to look at. If you use Databricks, you get a little bit nicer presentation of a data frame. So what I can do here in Colab is I can take my data frame and take a subset of it and convert it to pandas, and that's what I've done here. And then just tell the Python interpreter, here's a data frame, and Colab knows that to take a pandas data frame and display it in a nice manner. So you can see above, it's just simple text, and below it's HTML text. So the data frame looks a little bit nicer. You can also use the extension, load the Colab data table, and then with not a Spark data frame, again with a pandas data frame, then you can get this nice way of browsing through a table. And so I set the price to be 1 to, I don't know, 300 or something like that, and run the query, and there's nothing there, and increase the number here, and I'll get some data. Of course, I only have 10 entries, so I'm not really browsing through all the data. If I wanted to browse through more, then I would change my limit up here to a larger number, and I'd get more local pandas rows. You could set it quite large. You could also do sample if you wanted to sample your data. Okay, so that's my pandas data frame, which I'm using to look at my PySpark data by converting the PySpark data to pandas and then working with it. It's a little bit easier to work with if you just want to browse around. Of course, I can do other things like my Spark data frame summary, which is the statistics, or one of them, and convert that to pandas, and then I get a nice view of my statistics for the data frame. Then next up, I'm just going to do some typical things you would do, converting my column names and types to make it look nice. And for the tutorial, I'll drop some empty rows, split up my data into training and testing, set up a usual pipeline. If you want to see more, then watch the video I have on PySpark regression. There's lots of videos on how to do this. This is a pipeline, typical way you would do it. Once I've fitted my model above, then I can go ahead and get some fit metrics to see how well it is. The R-squared is 0.919. It's pretty good. And then after I've done that, I can go ahead and take my fitted model and transform to get some predictions on my test data, and then get some fit metrics for how well it fit on the test data, and finally I can graph it. So that's the run through. The important things, I think, are, of course, for Spark anyway, I'm going to install the library. There's two ways to do sessions. This is a simple way, and as you get to use more complex Spark libraries, you're going to want to use this second way of loading in your jars. I like the terminal to browse around. Definitely want to use the Spark UI so you can debug. Google Drive's convenient so you can access your data. All right, one more thing. Over here on the right, let's see if we can improve on this. So right now I've got about 12 gigs of data. What I want to do is improve on that. So if you look at the earlier part of the video, I referenced this Stack Overflow question. And you can look through some suggested ways of doing it, which is to crash the memory and then say yes when it asks you if you want more memory. But of course, that's, that was 2 years ago. Now that no longer works if you read the comments. The one thing that does seem to work for me still is this last one here. I should give it I should give it a thumbs up. He's got a 0 right now. Can I give him a thumbs up? Here we go. That worked for me. All right, so here's the notebook. So if you click on this notebook, what goes on. Now this notebook gives you a number of instructions here, none of which seems to work. That is, you run through this loop and it's going to crash out on you, and then you say yes when you want more memory. But that doesn't work. I don't know why, but watch what does work. I've got this notebook. This is the notebook that they have here, and I'm going to go ahead and connect. So I just take this notebook, and maybe there's something magic in this notebook. I don't know why this works. Please let me know if you do. I've not done anything but connect, but if you can see right now in the upper right, it says I've got 1 gig of RAM being used of about 25.4. So just by using this very notebook, now I have more memory. I didn't run it, I didn't do anything, just connect it. All right, so let's go ahead and use this, and I'm going to save to my drive, so I'll have a copy of this notebook. And this is essentially now my notebook. And I'm going to say, my big, memory. I'll do regression. Okay, so now it's on my local Google Drive. I'm going to get rid of these cells, because these are the ones that came with it. They don't really do anything. There are some instructions, I guess, at one time. It was helpful, but all right, so now I want to go back to my other notebook. Here it is, and I want to copy it in here. So, I don't want to type all these things out again in my new big memory notebook. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to select all cells. Then I'll do Control C for copy. You can say copy cell selection. And you can see it's got about 40 cells. Go over here. I'm going to paste all those cells. And usually this doesn't work. Yeah, it says Control V to paste, so I do that instead. Now I'll get all my cells in here. And now I have a notebook that has, twice as much memory. Now I can try to connect it. Remember, here's the one that I was connected. Here's my new one. It's going to tell me I don't have enough, I've got too many sessions. So let's get rid of the sessions. So here's the one. The first one in this list is the one that just opened. So I'm going to close this. And now, after killing that session, now let's see if I can connect. Now this is my big memory regression. Okay, let's see if it works. I've copied over the cells. It's initializing, blah, blah, blah. I look at it. Yeah, look at that. I've got 25 gigs of memory. The disk is the same. All right, let's run it just to see for the sake of, see if it's going to work. Run all. Here we go. So in my experience, this does work. So you might want to grab that notebook and put it in your local Google Drive in case someone decides for whatever reason to remove it. I've got a copy of it, and it seems to work for me. I suspect in some period of time, enough people do this that Google will remove that. So for now, anyway, it seems to work. All right, so I'm not going to let this, we don't have to wait for that to finish. So let's go ahead and finish this. We are done. So I demonstrated to you how to run PySpark in Google Colab. You can see a number of these on the web, but it's gotten to be simpler. So if you look at my notebook, essentially all you have to do is import the library for PySpark. But I've also shown you how to use some libraries which you'll want to use, and that's a little bit trickier. So you'll import those libraries from your Spark session. You can work with Google Drive, and then I've showed you how to install Spark UI, which again is a little bit trickier. So there's a few steps there. And if you look through here, I showed you how to include in your web browser a command to address the pop-up that's going to ask you if you're still there. So you can run your notebook overnight in a few days if you want to. So look through the notes. And additionally, I showed you how to get twice the memory by using this notebook that's on the web and how to copy cells over. So hopefully that helps you so you can use Google Colab. I would say right now it's probably one of the easiest ways to work if you want to get twice the memory for free. For me, next up is Databricks, but if you're a beginner, I would just start with Databricks because you don't have to do any of this configuration for Spark UI. But once you need to use a little bit more memory, the next step is to use this Colab in the free notebook. All right, I hope that helps you. I hope it works for you. Good luck.